start.
Can I
So
go and get my ouzo?
you got to go, and you can go and get your.
I need my ouzo, I think.
Yeah, it's not a good way to start the recording, Mira.
Oh.
Welcome to Reading Plato, week 1, spring 2020, and it's philosophy, skepticism, and wisdom. So my name's Bernie Lewin, and on behalf of Davis and Angus, who can't come tonight, welcome to the Platonic Academy of Melbourne. We were supposed to be at the Greek community, but because of COVID, we've gone online, which is lots of fun. And it does mean that folks like Nick in Sydney can join us as well. So there are some advantages. The purpose of the Academy is to promote Platonic philosophy in its substance and its spirit. And you'll see what I mean by that as we go along. The purpose of the group is to share the pleasure of actually reading Plato, to get into Plato by actually reading his writing. Now, this can be hard at first, and it does require some introduction. And so that's really the purpose of the class, to kind of do a bit of reading, to kind of understand it a bit and slowly get into Plato's view of the world. So this course is for absolute beginners, so we don't expect any prior knowledge of philosophy at all. But it certainly doesn't mean that it's easy necessarily at the beginning, and you might feel a bit lost at first, but don't worry about that. Just taking what you can and see how you go. And I assure you that as we go along, it'll become more familiar, because it is quite a different way to thinking to the way we normally think in the modern Western world. Okay, so the format for this course is we'll all meet here on Wednesdays, 6:30, come in any time after 6:15, and I'll give a talk and then we'll have a discussion. Now, usually when we have the face-to-face classes, there's just like mainly just one talk, and then we have a cup of tea and discussion afterwards. But what I find online is actually it's not quite good to talk for too long. So I'll talk for a bit and then we'll have a break and you guys can make some comments or ask some questions, and then I'll talk a bit more. Now, there's homework every week. And as I've been saying to people as we've been starting, it can be quite hard going. Like today's reading could have been quite hard going when you haven't read any Plato before and you haven't got any context for it. And that is totally fine and to be expected. But what I recommend you do is at least make the effort before the class. And a good tip is maybe after the class to go back to the reading and have another read if you get a chance, because you might take a bit more in then. So set aside some time to do this, and you'll get much more benefit from the course than otherwise. Okay. So the readings. So there are from the dialogues of Plato. Now, I don't know whether that surprises people, but Plato wrote these little plays, if you like, where a bunch of people are standing around and talking about a particular topic. The dialogues that we will be reading from is the Apology, which is an exceptional one because it's a speech by Socrates, and we'll explain that in a moment. Euthyphro and the Phaedo. Now, these are all translated in, as we were saying earlier, in the Penguin Last Days of Socrates. And there's a couple of translations, and Mira's got the other translation to the one that I've got here. And there's an older translation in Penguin, and there's lots of others as well. So, yeah, so it doesn't really matter which translation you get, and it's actually kind of useful for the class because you sometimes get different perspectives on issues, especially specific words that are important in Plato that get translated in different ways. Okay, now, and if you want to experience the writing in a different way, you can listen to recordings of it including the free recordings on the internet by the Project Gutenberg. And sorry, Project Gutenberg's got the text, but LibriVox uses that text to make recordings. So maybe when you're driving, if any of us ever do drive again, or doing the dishes or something, that can be a way to experience Plato as well. Now, the thing that we were talking about again earlier is that the way you find positions in the text with Plato is through these standard page numbers. Now that's a bit like chapter and verse in the Bible. Okay, so obviously there's different translations, there's different editions have different page numbers. So when you're referring to the text, you need to refer to the standard page numbers. So that's what we'll be referring to. Now, some of the internet versions, if you find the Project Gutenberg and a Kindle version stuff, don't have those standard page numbers, and that can be a real drag. So if you've got that problem, let me know and we can sort that out. It shouldn't be a problem next week because we're reading the entire small dialogue. Now, did everyone get, so all the readings are on this bookmark, which the people who received the text got in paper. And then the people who didn't would have got it as an attachment, but they got 3 of them. So you only need 1, but you can print it out and use it as a bookmark, or otherwise find the same the same information on the internet on our page for the Reading Plato class. So have a look for that out there. So Today will be a little bit different than normal because I'll spend a bit more time introducing Plato and his historical context. But from next week, we'll be pretty much just going through the reading and then discussing the reading. So any questions about that introductory stuff before we get going?
From me.
No, okay, we're all happy with that. So look, what we might do now is just to introduce ourselves going around the room. So if you could just say your name and just give us a brief account of why you're interested in reading Plato. So Achilles, you're on my top left. Maybe you can start for us.
Well, as you might imagine, with a name like Achilles, I'm often thrown into the deep end with mythology and with the readings of the classics. And I have to admit, I'm not really au fait with it either. So this is my introduction late in life to hopefully an interesting and enlightening chapter of my heritage. So yeah,
okay, that's
not,
great.
I'm not doing it.
So with a name like Achilles, do people presume you know all about the ancient Greeks?
Yes,
That's great. I love it.
So yeah, it's more about my own personal, I just want to learn a bit more about the writings and the readings. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Achilles. Mira, can you go next, and then after you, Jim?
Yep. So Mira Antonio, another Greek background person of Cypriot origin. Like Achilles, I just want to embrace a bit more of my heritage and the ancient Greeks. And I did sciences, so I didn't do any of the arts. And yeah, the philosophy, just the concept of philosophy and the philosophy ideas and things and the thinking and the wisdom. I just don't know much about it at all, so I just want to really learn about it.
Oh, great. Well, thanks very much. Hopefully you will learn some stuff. Okay, next Jim, and after Jim, Eleni.
Yeah, well, I've heard about this because I often would go to the Greek lectures in the city, and so I'm on the, I get the emails. And I'm actually a teacher. I'm teaching philosophy at BCE level, and I kind of like the idea of getting a different perspective on things.
Oh, great. Okay, so you'll keep me on my toes then, hopefully.
No.
Okay, Eleni and then Anastasia.
Hi. I've always been interested in ancient Greece. I studied a little bit of ancient history when I was at school a lifetime ago. And now that my girls have grown and moved out and I'm on my own, and with COVID as well, it just felt like it was the right time to delve into this and take advantage of the courses that are available and the time that I have. So here I am.
Oh, thanks very much. I hope you enjoy it. So Anastasia and then Kathy.
Thanks, Bernie, and thanks to everyone for your introductions. I'm Anastasia, and I actually the course was highly recommended, Bernie, so I'm a referral from one of your past students, Maria Atlas White, with Hume White. They absolutely loved it, and Maria and I used to go to Melbourne University together some time ago, and I'd studied a humanities degree, but I mainly did psychology and Middle Eastern studies, archaeology. I didn't have the chance to do philosophy, and I think, as Eleni mentioned, I think COVID-19 and the global pandemic context, I think some of Plato's musings from over 2,000 years ago are really relevant here. We're living in an alternate universe and in a cave, so to speak, and a dystopia, not a utopia. So I just want to do a deep dive into it. And because also in my work, it's been very stressful because I'm in an essential service, and it's been really intense, 12-hour working days, what have you. I just wanted to be able to think in a different way and challenge myself and just grow and transform and, imbibe my values with some deep thinking. So that's what's brought me here.
Oh, you're very ambitious. I hope we can live up to that, Anastasia. Yeah. So Kathy and then Nick.
I concur with what everyone has said so far. I take what people have said, very similar to me. I've had an interest in the ancient Greek classics. I actually did one semester of learning ancient Greek at the Greek Centre, but I was working full-time and trying to keep up with the homework was just too hard. So unfortunately, I had to let that lapse. And I just want to say thank you to the essential workers. You're doing an amazing job, Anastasia and Jim, working. My son's a teacher too, and I just watch how hard he works on Zoom. It's just crazy. I want to think in a different, I want to think of how they thought, I guess. And yeah, a bit like what Anastasia said, it's just surreal, these parallels that we're living in at the moment. And it was something that I'm Achilles' partner, by the way, and so we wanted to have something to share in our time, but we sort of live differently because I care separately. I care for my mother, and so we wanted something that we could have a dialogue with. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Okay. A little bit more intellectual.
Well, you certainly have an opportunity to think differently, I think. But it might be shocking. So just finish off with Nick then.
Hi, everyone. Why philosophy? Why Plato? I think because in a lot of ways, I've done a couple of philosophy courses over, just small, short versions of sort of intro philosophy, and Plato's always been put forward as the source for our Western way of thinking, and so I wanted to go back to that source material and learn more about it. So and like you, I'm looking out at the world and thinking there has to be, is there an objective, can you actually sort of have an objective truth, or can you actually, when you use the word truth, what exactly does that mean? And I think Plato can give us some, advice in that area. So I'm looking forward to learning more over the next few weeks.
Hopefully. All right. Well, look, that's great. Thanks everyone for that. We're a nice small group tonight, and so that's really nice because it helps with discussion and that sort of thing. So thanks for all coming. And what we're going to go in the deep end now. I'm going to throw something at you now, and just sit back and kind of take it in. You won't take it all in, but it's something that we will just keep coming back to again and again. If you do other courses, coming back to it again and again, because it's really about the way Platonism sees the world differently from the way we generally see it in modern times. Now, after that exercise, then we'll go and look at a bit of the history, the historical context of Plato, where Plato fits in, where he fits in with philosophy in ancient Greece and that sort of thing. And then finally, we'll get to the little bit of text that we were reading and have a little bit of chat about that. So hopefully we'll get through all that today, but if not, we can just do it next week. But I think we should be fine with that, especially with the small group. So sit back and relax, and we're just going to do an exercise now, and we'll see how we go with that, and you can bring up some discussion points afterwards if you like. Okay, so folks might be wondering, what is philosophy? Plato said that philosophy begins with wonder. This course is not about learning lots of stuff. It's about wondering about what it is to experience. Sensible experience, seeing, touching, hearing. What it is to know facts, to know concepts, to know things. Where do these things come from? Where does this knowledge come from? And how do we know this knowledge is true? And in what sense do we mean true? What is it to know things? So it's about knowing, and it's about the being of the things that we know. In what sense do we say they exist? And what's the relationship between their existence and our knowing? Now, Plato's view presents to us moderns as quite crazy. In fact, I'll go so far as to say that if it doesn't strike you as crazy, you probably don't get it. Plato's often taught in a sanitized way in our universities and schools, but not here. And that's a big part of the mission of this group, to teach Plato the way Plato was taught and understood in ancient times. So here we present Plato in all its strangeness. So let's get the wonder going by starting with a little exercise. Have you ever wondered what it is to know something? Not so much to have an idea, but to have an idea about something. You know it, and yet how? Now consider my cup. I consider my cup. I can see it. I can see the yellow. I can feel it. I can hear it. And I can even taste the warm tea inside. All in all, this cup that I see and I feel is what, all that I see and I feel is what I know about the cup. How do I know the cup? From my senses. But think about your senses. The yellow of this cup is actually in my eyes. It's an impression on my retina. The touch is impressions in my senses, in my fingers, and so on. All your senses, your hearing and everything are changes within you. So everything I know about the cup is actually in me. So how's that? Everything I know about the cup is in me. So how do I know the cup itself? Is there anything that I know about the cup that is not in me? So if it's all in my senses, and it's all my senses are all in me, then do I know anything about the cup that's not in me? So perhaps I conclude, the real cup, the cup here, is an idea constructed in my mind from my experience in my senses. The construction's in me, the knowledge, the experience is in me. So there you go. The cup's in my mind, perceived in from my senses, entirely within me. This is the real cup I'm talking about. It's real, but it's real in me. Its reality is entirely ideal, someone might say. And so there I am, I'm an idealist. Sensible things, sense things like that you hear and taste and see in the world, sensible things are ideas in my mind. So there you go. I'm an idealist. But hang on, when I look away, is the cup still there? And you can see the cup. Well, I think you can. You seem to see the cup. So how can it just be in my mind? And what about the tea in the cup? It's getting cold. I know it's getting colder. Do I cause it to get cold? So there's important ways in which the cup must be considered independent from me. It's causally independent. I don't cause it to exist. I don't cause the tea to get cold. It's also independent, must be independent because it also seems to be in your senses as well. We all see the same cup. So how can it be entirely constructed in my senses and you see it? There must be a cup independent from my knowing of it. Okay, but the last step is, then how do I know it? How do I know the cup that is independent from me if all I know about the cup is in my senses? The cup that is not in my senses, that we kind of feel must be there, is beyond my senses. Now, most philosophical positions come to this problem. Some people call it the mind-body problem. And in fact, you might be able to divide up all the schools of philosophy by how they treat this problem. Now, mostly in modern philosophy, there's the proposal that there is this independent material cup beyond my senses, giving my sensible cup and giving you your sensible cup. So there's a kind of a correspondence between the individual material object and your sensible experience of that object. But you don't know that that independent object is there. But it must be there, because otherwise it'd be appearance without anything that appears. It must be there. Otherwise, there's no difference between the delusions of a madman who fantasizes a cup and scientific reality of this cup that we know is there. So we tend to call this materialism or correspondence theory of truth. And there, in the old days, there was a workaround to kind of establish where the independent, unknown material cup is. We don't know it's there, but God knows it's there. And God wouldn't fool us and make some appearance without anything that appears. Modern philosophy, about 300 years ago, rejected this, not because they didn't believe in God, but because they thought this was a bit of a fudge. And yet, they could not solve the problem. They just took the leap of faith and demanded it must be there. And even though it does not make sense when we think about it, and maybe you want to go and think about it after this class, but we're so used to seeing the world in this way that it's hard to see it any other way. Plato didn't see it this way. For Plato, the reality of the immediate sensible cup does not come to a correspondence of the cup with some unknown external material reality. For him, it comes from within, from the observer. We construct its reality from insensible forms, sometimes called ideas, but better called forms, insensible forms, internal and immediately known. Our knowledge of the world is already latent inside us. Plato proposed that our sensible world is a projection of the more fundamental reality within. It's a projection of the more fundamental reality within. Sensible things, real sensible things in my senses, like this cup, are like shadows on the wall, projecting an inner reality. Someone mentioned the cave analogy earlier, which some people may know, where Plato presents the reality of sensible things as mere shadows on the wall. The real inner reality that is the projection of these shadows is inside. So, this cup, it's a shadow. That's crazy. Welcome to Plato. Welcome to philosophy. Now, I don't expect you to understand all that, but that's throwing you in the deep end. That's really, in the end, what it's all about. We're going to have lots of fun and look at lots of other issues in the meantime, but that's really what it's all about. And so we'll come back to it again and again. As we go through, and in the other classes, we come back to it. People studying the Republic, we look at that whole issue again and how to make sense of what Plato means. In terms of the analogy of the cave, where he's got people sitting there looking at the shadows on the wall of the real things that are behind them, but they don't know the things are behind them. In Platonism, you talk about it as a turning around. Now, in another way of looking at it, and I'll just share my screen. Wait a minute to just share the screen here. Okay. So we can think of it as looking inward rather than looking out for the essence of the reality of things. We can also, in the Renaissance, when there was a revival of Platonism, this famous painting by Raphael was drawn in the Vatican, and it's got Plato in the middle pointing up. I've put him, I've highlighted Plato on the left with Aristotle. Now, Aristotle was one of his students who took a different view, the view that's more closer to the way we think in modern times on this issue. So he's got Plato pointing up to the forms, that the essence of reality is in these forms, And Aristotle is pointing down to the particular things. The essence of the reality is in the particular things, like the material cup and so forth. So that's a nice analogy to think about. Or in the cave, it's about turning around. Instead of looking for the essence of reality in the particular cup, you turn around and look at how you've actually constructed that cup in your world out of these so-called forms. And we will talk about them as we go through the session. So have we got any questions or any thoughts about that now, about the difference between those two views?
What were you inferring about mind-body, please, Bernie?
Well, there's different ways, there's different nuances with the mind-body problem, I suppose. But when it came up, I don't know whether people have heard of Descartes. I think, therefore I am. Maybe you've heard that expression before. And Descartes did a similar exercise to what I was just doing, which was called progressive doubt. He was in a period of great skepticism, and he did the doubt until doubted and doubted and doubted until he found something that was the most certain, which he thought was his being. He was aware of his being through his thinking. But so he tried to get from there, from this internal thing, to things outside. So there's this sense in which we need to get outside. So there's myself and my perceptions and everything. But what about the world out there, you know? And so the world out there, if you like, is body. And the inside is perhaps psyche or spirit or mind, or the various words are used. And we'll look at some of the Greek words that we used. And so they saw it as a connection between the observer or the mind and the things that are not the mind, the things that are outside the mind. And they're called body. So we might say mind, body, we might say mind, matter, mind and matter. That would be a way of putting it in terms of the Aristotelian view would give that. Whereas with Plato, the essence of things isn't in this external matter at all. You actually have to look inside to understand your reality, the reality of your sensible world. Okay.
Well, sorry, Bernie, can I just ask another question? So when you say that that there is an idealized form of the cup that that is internal to us, so we all have an internal idea of what, you know, the cup is, as an example. So where does that originate from? So how is it that we could all have that same idea, that same idea of the form of that cup?
Yeah, that's enough, Nick. Don't ask me anymore, because that is such a huge question, please.
Oh, okay.
This is what it's all about. This is what it's all about. And I'll just make a couple of points here. So people used to translate Plato and call it idealism. Instead of calling the forms, the word actually, our word idea comes from one of the words that Plato used. But that tends to suggest, people think that tends to suggest a particular idea in my mind or ideas in your mind. But there's a sense in Plato in which these ideas are beyond our minds. And just to throw you in with something that might help you understand that, Plato, as we will explain, was very much into mathematics, and saw that mathematics, basic mathematics, rather than language, there's a contrast, Aristotle language, Plato mathematics, was a good way to get in to understand how reality is constructed. So if we think of, for example, the number 2, if you think I might have 2 books or 2 cups or 2 pens or something else. Well, you know, we've got the cups and the pens. We all know about that. But where is 2? Where is the number 2? Is it in my mind? Is it in the 2 things? And is it in your mind? And is the 2 that's in your mind the same as in my mind? And if we all died, would there still be 2? And if there's no humans on Earth, would there still be 2? So there's a sense, if you think about that, and that's another one to contemplate. Again, this is not about, we'll do lots of content, we'll talk about lots of things, but the main teaching of this course is all about thinking about these sorts of issues. And if you go away and think about where a number is, where is actually number in the world? Is it in my mind? Is it in matter? Or is it somewhere else? So it used to be called, Plato's theory of ideas, but it's been called Plato's forms. And if you think, what's a form? Think a number. That's a start. That's your entry point. Where is 2? It's kind of like I have an idea of 2, but 2 is in some sense separate from that idea. It's something independent because my idea can go and it's still there. I hope that helps. And I just, on one other point, which might be helpful, is that, you know, and this is jumping ahead a bit, but there's this idea of Plato's theories of form. Is it's kind of that, like there's up in heaven, there's this ideal cup floating around, and there's an ideal chair, and there's an ideal bed, and there's all these ideal things just waiting to be expressed in the world. Well, that's kind of, we'll see as we go along that's not really the way to think about it, but it's a good start to say that there is a concept. The idea of the cup is a concept in our heads, and that's on the way to going towards the essence of its being. You just go that way, you turn around and go that way, rather than go to the particular material object and say, well, its essence is there in its, you know, particularity. So that's a lot there, Nick. You maybe I shouldn't have gone so far, but anyway, just to think about. We'll go over these things again and again. Okay, anyone else?
Just on that point, I think a good one that's easy to get your head around is the idea of a perfect circle. Like everybody has an idea of what a perfect circle is, but there's nowhere on Earth is there a perfect circle.
Yeah.
You can't draw a perfect circle, no matter how, there's always something not quite perfect about it, but we know it as an ideal.
So numbers and geometry, basic mathematics. So you say, make me a circular garden bed. No, that's square. You know, draw a circle on the page. There's all these different ways that in your sensible world you can have a circle, but it's all conforming to the idea of a circle. And as Jim said, a perfect circle, which you never have in the world. And this is this important way to think about it. Plato says every circle participates in the ideal circle. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. Thanks, Jim. That was good. Anyone else? Okay, so that was all a bit heavy and heady. The next part is a bit of context, which is getting into Plato and his context. So Plato wrote, I might share the screen again. Here we go. We'll get some maps up. So Plato wrote a long time ago, 400 years before the Christian era. That's 2,400 years ago, in ancient Athens, in ancient Greece. So what was Greece like then? Firstly, I want to just explain Greece in 2 ways, because actually Plato and Aristotle were kind of at a turning point in Greek history, in fact, in turning point in Western history. So first of all, I'll explain the world that Plato grew up in, and then we'll see what happened after his death and shortly after Aristotle's death. So up until the 5th century, the Greek city-states were on the fringe of 5th century BC. When I say that, I mean BC, it's all BC, on the fringe of huge civilizations, including the Babylonian and the Egyptian, which have been going for a long time. But in the 5th century, the greatest empire ever was Persia. Its influence extended to the Greek colonies on the edge of the Aegean Sea, on what is now the coast of Turkey. Greece itself was was for the Persians ripe for conquest, expanding their empire. So the Persian king brought a huge army over to crush them. The Greek city-states banded together and amazingly defeated the invaders. The story of how they did so is immortalized in the writings of the historian Herodotus. But not so long after they repelled the Persians, the city-states started fighting each other. War between Athens and allies against Sparta went on for nearly 3 decades. Plato grew up during this time and was a young man when Athens was defeated in the Peloponnesian Wars. The situation remained tense when he opened his academy and when he wrote the dialogues that we will be reading. After Plato, there was soon this amazing revolution, and it involved one of his students, Aristotle. So Aristotle, remember we had him pointing down before? Aristotle, a Macedonian from the north, tutored, he was a student for about 20 years in Plato's academy, and then he went up and tutored Philip of Macedonia's son. Philip conquered the Greek city-states, and then his son, Alexander the Great, beat the Persians and conquered the entire Persian Empire. So this gave us what we call the Hellenistic world. So there was, after Plato and Aristotle, you got this world, this large area where lots of different cultures and ideas mixed together, all in the Greek language. So the lingua franca was Greek and Egyptian, Babylonian, Persian, importantly Jewish ideas, all mixed together in this amazing broad communication across a huge expanse of Europe and Asia. Even when the Roman Empire emerged in the West, Greek remained the lingua franca, so it actually extended across over to Britain and so forth. And so the Greek lingua franca was quite incredibly expansive. And like the Jewish Torah, the Jewish Bible, for example, was translated into Greek, and that became the standard. And when Christianity came along, the Greek Old Testament was standard, and the New Testament was all written in Greek. So in this world, the ideas of Plato and Aristotle greatly influenced trends in philosophy, science, and religion. They greatly influenced Christianity and the Christian world up into the Middle Ages, the Islamic world, and the Renaissance. And let's just have a little look at this. So what we had was, first of all, the Hellenistic world, but that did break up as the Roman Empire expanded over here. But for a long time, Greek was the lingua franca, although Latin was on the rise. Now, as that Western world went into the Dark Ages, over in the old Persian Empire, in the Islamic caliphates, there was a renaissance of Greek wisdom. And of course, in the Byzantine Empire, there was a continuation of Greek language and thought. And so when the Byzantine Empire started collapsing and actually Constantinople collapsed, there was a kind of a correspondence with what was happening in Europe with the Renaissance. And so it was in Florence in the late 15th century that the entire works of Plato were translated into Latin, and there was a revival in the Renaissance of Platonism. So Platonism tended to be in these periods of prosperity, the prevailing philosophy, but there was also competing philosophies that grew up in the Hellenistic period and Aristotelianism as well, and they competed and merged and new things came about, like, for example, Christianity. So let's just go back now to before the Hellenistic period, and I'll just close that slideshow because that might be distracting. Okay, so let's just go back now. So we're going back, we've got the before and the after, and now we're going back in the middle where Plato was. So despite the conflict between these city-states that I was talking about, they were very wealthy and there was lots of trade. Money was widely used, there was prosperous capitalism, and the economy was amazingly diverse. Well, I find it amazing in terms of various trades and professions. Some families became very wealthy. Now, there were slaves at the bottom. Women had a very peripheral role in public life. But at the top of public life, there was a class of wealthy men that seemed to have a lot of time on their hands to administer, to govern, and debate, and time to do science and philosophy. The Greek tradition of philosophy and science began in the 6th century BC and properly in the 5th century across Greece and its colonies. You might have heard of Heraclitus, perhaps Parmenides, Zeno maybe, Zeno's paradoxes, Pythagoras, perhaps you've heard of Pythagoras. It's okay if you haven't. The thing is, these were all philosophers who were before Plato. And all those ones I mentioned greatly influenced Plato. So there was that context already. It was already a thriving scene. The thing is that Plato is the first philosopher where we've got complete works. Most of these others, we've just got fragments from later compilers of philosophy. Now, the other important aspect of the culture at the time was Athenian democracy. So it was rowdily practiced in the Senate and in the law courts. A young man could get on in the world by persuasive speeches in the Senate and in the courts. So in this context, there arose a profession of teachers of rhetoric. A wealthy family would send their sons off to learn how to debate from one of these teachers. Some of these teachers boasted that they could make any ridiculous proposal, make a case for any ridiculous proposal persuasively, and then turn around and persuade you to the opposite argument. So Sophism tended to be about persuasion, about teaching rhetoric. Some of these teachers also had pretensions to wisdom. The word for wisdom is Sophia, and they were sometimes called, they were called sophists. Now, sophist has a pejorative connotation for us, mainly thanks to Plato. At the time, it was considered a respectable profession. Okay, so now you've probably heard a bit about Socrates, and you've probably heard a lot about Socrates related to Plato. It's interesting that sometimes on the internet, often on the internet in memes and things, you will see quotes that are attributed to Socrates that are in fact quotes from the works of Plato. So there's an important distinction here between the historical Socrates and Socrates as Socrates appears in Plato's dialogues or plays. So the other characters, other historical characters also appear, like I mentioned Parmenides and Gorgias, and there's many other characters that appear in his dialogues in a fictional way. But most important is Socrates. Now let's consider first the historical Socrates. He was a singular figure in this kind of sophistic culture. He was renowned for questioning people in the streets and raising doubts about what they thought they knew. We don't know much about what Socrates believed because he never wrote anything down, but we do know his skeptical technique. He was very skeptical. He would attack any pretensions to knowledge. So we don't know if he had a positive philosophy, but we do know that he was skeptical, annoying, and disruptive. So Socrates developed a following, especially among young men. And he was accused of misleading the youth by promoting lack of respect for the gods. He was tried, convicted, put to death, given the hemlock, a poisonous drink. So that is the historical Socrates. Now what we are reading, it actually follows the basic narrative of his life, what we will be reading. And these dialogues we've got were put together from very early times because they followed a narrative, not because they were written in that order by Plato. Some of them are very early dialogues, and like the Phaedo is quite late, the one we'll be reading later. Now, Plato's Socrates is a fictional depiction of Socrates, like all the other people that appear in the dialogues. So scholars do debate what Socrates actually believed. Did he have a theory of forms, and was it the same as Plato's, or did Plato go beyond it, and so forth? But this isn't really important to us. What's important is really what Plato's doing in the plays, what he's trying to show us. Now, the early plays, the early dialogues are not dogmatic. They're these kind of cute question and answer things, trying to get to the nut of the philosophical question, trying to define something often. And then the later dialogues, like the Phaedo, are of a similar form to this, but they tend to be pushing more a positive philosophy. So Plato was active early in the 4th century BC in this intellectual culture within this, this culture of teaching rhetoric, and also this culture of philosophy. He established his academy it was a vineyard or something that he inherited, and that's where the name comes from, which researched and taught mathematical sciences, as I mentioned. Mathematical sciences were begun in Greece, came from Egypt and Babylon, but mostly Egypt, but begun in Greek in a philosophical way by the Pythagoreans. So the Pythagoreans greatly influenced Plato, and the mathematics was researched and taught, and there were great advances in mathematics within the academy in Plato's lifetime and long after his death. So Aristotle was a student of Plato's. He went away from Athens and then came back and set up his own school. And as I was saying, Aristotelianism and Platonism were rivals, and the rivalry in terms of methodology, we can think of logic and linguistic-based philosophy compared to mathematical-based methodology. We can talk more about that, but Jim and I were, just brought up a bit of an idea about that earlier. Okay, so why read Plato? So Plato, as I was saying, is the first surviving philosophy where we get full works that it seemed not to be corrupted very much. He was hugely influential. And at the Platonic Academy of Melbourne, we feel that his genuine philosophy has been, to a certain extent, lost and misunderstood in the modern age. And so it's all really about rediscovering Plato. That's what we're all about. So there we go. So any questions about that historical sort of context, or anything anyone want to add to that?
Oh, just the amazing people. It's like, what the hell?
So long
I
ago.
I wish I was there at the time. It would have been amazing. An amazing world.
Well, I hope you were. I just hope you wouldn't be a slave. That would be terrible, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would be. Yeah, just mind-boggling. You look at Greece now and you look at what they were. It's like, oh, amazing people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who aren't given enough credit, actually, in this world. Aren't given enough credit.
Well, we will give them a lot of credit in this course, I assure you.
Yeah.
You'll be very surprised about what's actually come from Plato and from Plato's sources as well, in terms of our culture, like in Christianity, for example.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else about that historical stuff? Any questions about that? All right, well, look, if you've got any other questions, just, you can bring them up later. That's fine, as they come up to you. At the end, I'll leave the video on, and if anyone's wants to ask any questions after that, that's fine too. So what we'll do now is we'll go right into the reading. So what I normally do is just give a bit of a spiel, kind of my interpretation of it, and then we can have a bit of a chat about it afterwards. Okay, so the setting of this reading is a bit unusual because it isn't a question and answer. This isn't a question and answer, but Euthyphro, what we'll read for next week is a classic early Socratic dialogue with this question and answer, trying to work out what's the definition of piety or justice and so on. But this is the speech, supposed speech, the fictional speech of Socrates in his trial. So he was tried for corrupting the youth and by disrespecting the gods, the Greek gods. And so he's up there, he's in the trial. There's about 500 on the jury. They're really rowdy. Sometimes they interrupt him and you hear him sort of saying, "No, quiet, just listen to me." So there's all this drama going on. And so, and so in the particular section that I've pulled out, it's about solving a riddle of Delphi. So Socrates claims that he has a reputation for wisdom, Sophia, hence philosophy, lover of wisdom. It was, by the way, philosophy, the term seems to have been first used for the practice by the Pythagoreans. Maybe, we're not absolutely sure that they were the first, but it was certainly used by Plato. What he was doing is philosophy. Okay, but prior to that, people didn't always use that term. Okay, so he called this, he had a reputation for wisdom, he called this human wisdom, and it is purported that he is the wisest man. So I don't know whether people know about oracles in ancient times. They were kind of like prophets. There was the most important one in ancient Greek was the oracle at Delphi. And the oracle was a woman who went into a trance and so on and gave an answer to a particular question. So some of the consultations at the oracle at Delphi are famous in terms of the history of Greece, because great leaders would ask great questions of government and war and so on. Now, so a friend of this story goes that a friend of Socrates went up and asked the oracle, "Well, who's the wisest of them all? Who's the wisest man in Athens?" And the oracle said this: "No one is wiser than Socrates." So the thing about the oracles findings is that pronouncements is that they were always cryptic. They were known to be a riddle. So they gave the divine truth, but in a riddle. Now, cynics might say, oh, well, that's because they could have a bet each way and say, I didn't really mean that. But if you're a believer, it was a riddle, and the riddle needed to be solved. So the riddle for Socrates in this story is that Socrates famously said, I know nothing, and that's why he would always ask people. He was a skeptic. Other people said they knew something. All he did was just show them that they also didn't know anything. So Socrates said, the riddle is basically this: I know that I'm not wise, and yet I'm the wisest. So how can it be that I'm not wise, and yet the oracle says I'm the wisest? So he sets out on this journey to falsify the claim that he's the wisest. Now, the first people to go to would be, of course, the people who have a reputation for being wise. And so he went and approached them, and he would do his questioning thing that we will get to next week. And then he realized that while these people think they're wise, actually they're not wise at all. They don't know what they're talking about. Indeed, he found that wisdom is inversely proportional to reputation for wisdom. His questions only showed up their ignorance and made them upset, which is a hint as to why he's now before the courts. For this reason, Socrates gets a reputation for being wise. And again, the cynic listening in the jury or whatever might say, yeah, well, you've got a reputation for being, pretensions to wisdom, to being a smart ass and showing everyone else how dumb they were, but maybe not so. So the next people he went to were the poets, and he found that they were ignorant about the poetry they composed, more ignorant than ordinary folk. They can't explain their poems. Moreover, they have illusions that they have knowledge of what the poems are about. Now, when we do more Plato, we will kind of understand what he's talking about here. We're just seeing this thrown out, and we don't really know what he's talking about. They think they know, but they don't. Now, I can just give you a hint of what he's talking about here. If you imagine a great artist who really is into their art, a great painter or something else or whatever, they write beautiful poetry, they do some amazing painting, but they're not really a good art critic. The sort of knowledge he's talking about here is the knowledge perhaps of the art critic who can say, well, that's good art and that's bad art. And the artists themselves, well, they're just into their thing, So, and they're not particularly necessarily clever people. They're not like your mathematician or your doctor or anything. So this is the sort of thing he's talking about. And he will actually, what he actually believes, and this comes out later, is that it's not about their human intelligence, they're intelligent, it's just they're channeling the divine. So artistic inspiration is divine inspiration. Now, also these poets, but these poets sometimes don't realize this, and there's a dialogue ion that really brings this out. The poets think they know a lot about stuff because they write poetry about all this stuff, and Homer writes all about all these different things, and people think that Homer knows about all this stuff and that these poets know about it, but they don't. They don't. They think they know, but they don't. Now, he finally gets to the craftspeople, and he finds that actually they do know something. They do have their skills, and they know a bit about what they do. So they might be a saddle maker, a wheelwright, or whatever else, and they do have a certain amount of knowledge. But again, like the poets, they tend to have this illusion that they know more. And so this obscures true wisdom. So Socrates concludes that it's better to be himself. Others think that they know and are wise, but Socrates knows that he's not wise. So the answer to the riddle is that human wisdom is naught. Socrates is of no account to wisdom, nor are the poets, nor anyone else. The only wisdom, the only true wisdom is divine wisdom. Socrates serves the gods by showing that folks who think they are wise are not so. And these people who think they are wise are kind of pretending to divine wisdom. So the implied conclusion here is that he stands accused of impiety, of disrespecting the gods, when in fact he's more pious than all the others. So this is the passage, that's pretty much the passage in his defense that we were looking at today. And so it's got the two themes which sound, we don't have any context of this, but the two themes, the scepticism and wisdom being divine beyond the human. And so we wonder what that scepticism is, and we'll see it next week, and what he actually means by divine wisdom. So I've probably spoken enough now. Any questions or comments on that, or any impressions from the reading, anything I've left out? Yeah, just speak up.
Okay.
Yeah, just go for it.
What I took out of the wisdom thing was that, and it might have just been my interpretation, that wisdom was knowing what you didn't know, like the poets and the craftsmen. Well, the craftsmen knew their craft and they had skills, but they thought they knew more than that. And he thought, well, I don't know anything, so I've got more wisdom because I recognise that I don't know anything. Whereas these guys think they've got wisdom because they know about something.
Yeah, like they have a bit of knowledge, and they inflate themselves and think that they've got wisdom.
Yeah, so it's like,
yeah.
No, the person with wisdom is the person that knows what they don't know.
Okay. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else?
When I was reading it, I sort of, the idea of humility also came to mind, because Socrates does, speak of himself as being a gadfly, as being there to taunt and to provoke, I guess, the people that he's talking to, but but at the same time he's also claiming that he, as Mira stated, that he's aware of how little he knows, and in that awareness he's able to be more truthful in his in the way that he expresses himself, but sort of trying to reconcile the way in which he speaks to the people around him, and but still he sort of does it in a very almost in an arrogant fashion. So I could understand why people found him incredibly annoying, because there is a certain sort of arrogance, I think, to the way he makes a pronouncement at the end of a particular dialogue.
Yes, he could be very annoying, and he might have described himself as a gadfly, but certainly people around him saw him as a gadfly that needed to be swatted, and he was swatted. The historical Socrates, and also the Socrates in the story that we will follow right through to the end. Yeah. So
one thing I got from the reading was the level of wisdom which Socrates seemed to have. And he touches on divine wisdom and how that is totally different to the type of wisdom we're talking about on a popular level, you know, being the politician or the tradesman or whoever that might be. Yeah, you kind of, yeah, there's that, there's this, the essence of what he's saying is that, yes, I do have an element of wisdom, but it's my own. And if I'm looking for divine wisdom, then I've got to look elsewhere, and it doesn't seem to be around me. It's more of a divine equity. Does that make any sense?
It certainly does, yeah. So it raises the question of what is this divine wisdom? And in our secular age, that can be quite difficult to kind of come to, and a bit confronting, perhaps if, you know, we're not particularly religious. And so the two things he's presenting here is that Socrates, the character Socrates, and maybe historical Socrates, is using skepticism to undermine pretensions to divine wisdom, which he calls human wisdom, which is not real wisdom, right? So the skepticism is, the first thing is that the skepticism is very important to philosophy. If you don't start with doubt, why do I believe that? Because of this. Why do I believe that? Because of that. How do I know? How do I know? Where is the foundation? Oh, there's no foundation. I need to find a new foundation. The beginning of philosophy is doubt. And if you read, we're getting back to, we mentioned Descartes. You know, if you read Descartes' Meditations, he actually takes you through his thought process. Doubt, 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 doubt. It's a good example of what we're talking about here. So doubt is used to move away, in Plato's terms, human wisdom. That's the first thing. And we'll get into that in the next dialogue, and as we go on, what we're talking about, especially next week, we'll get into his method of doing that. But the next thing is this, okay, so there's divine wisdom. What's this? Oh, so we have to wait for the prophet to, you know, and the prophet writes his book and tells us what the truth is. Well, you know, that is certainly one way of thinking about it. And the oracles and prophets and notions of even poets channeling divine wisdom is in the mix here. But before people start just thinking, well, that's all it's all about, if we can get back to, for example, the perfect circle that Jim brought up, or the number 2, right? Now, if we can think of those things in Plato's eyes, they have the characteristics of the divine. They're unchanging, undying, and immediately known, and somehow have an influence in the world. You know, according to Plato, maybe you think otherwise, 2 never dies. The perfect circle never dies. In a way, even if there were no circles in the world, Plato would probably say that there is still the perfect circle as a form. There's always the form of 2. It's unchanging. But it's immediately known. Oh, sorry. And the other important thing is that it's insensible. So we might have, when I say insensible, I mean not in our senses. So invisible and so forth. So you might have 2 things in your hands, but 2 itself is undying, insensible, but immediately known and somehow active in the world. So I'm throwing that out there for folks who may feel a bit alienated by Plato saying wisdom, the only true wisdom is divine. We might say the only true wisdom is mathematical or something like that.
Bernie, aren't these parameters like a circle or the number 2? They're a human construct. So one could argue that if there are no humans around, then these things don't exist.
Yeah, okay, well that's your claim, Archie. They are a human construct. Tell us about that. Why are they a human construct? How do you see the number 2 in terms of where it exists? So we're talking about the being of things here. It's strange to think of the being of number 2. We think of the being of the cup. What is its existence? You see a photograph of the cup, that's not the cup. The cup is the cup. The photograph is just an image of it, right? So we're talking about the being of 2. Tell me, Archie, Achilles, what is the being of 2? Where is it? If it's a human construct, tell me how it is a human construct.
Well, I'm no mathematician. I don't really know the history of mathematics, but or I'm probably burying myself really deeply right now. But look, give it a go. Obviously, somebody invented the numeric system because of need, mathematics would be another language as such to express the ideas of science and measurements and whatnot. But again, I would have thought that, okay, they just didn't pop out of nothing, or did they?
Well, did they? Has anyone else got any thoughts on that? Do people think that there is something in perhaps the number 2 or the perfect circle that is beyond the human construct, beyond the construction of humans? Or do people agree with Achilles there?
Does a cat know 2? Or a bear? Does a bear know that there are two of them?
Yeah. Well, what do people think?
Well, certainly some animals can identify numbers to a certain extent, but it's certainly not universal. But the idea that there are certain concepts that, like some mathematics, that just work, and it's always the same. Like how to figure out the area of a triangle. I mean, there's a universal law. Now, obviously, humans have come up with that, but have they discovered it or have they invented it? That's what you're looking at, aren't you?
Yeah, so the question Achilles...
See, I don't know what I'm looking for.
Yeah, is it a discovery or an invention or an interpretation? So it could be a discovery and interpretation. I mean, you could even think of one. Like get more basic there. Does oneness exist? One cup. Outside of human construction, is there a sense? Do you feel that there's a sense that in which that 2 or 1 or the perfect circle is beyond our thought and our construction?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Give us a riff on that, Mira.
So I'm picking up on Achilles where he said, does a cat or a bear know there's a number 2? Now, if we look at the animal kingdom, we might, maybe not the number 2, but there is me. So there's one animal, the male. Let's talk about, procreation, the cat, the dog. There's me and there's another. So they might not think that there's, maybe the number 2 is a human take on what another is, like giving it a name. But I'm thinking, well, maybe there is a divine, what are we talking about? The divine, not a wisdom, a divine.
It's a divine form.
Universal.
Form, yeah. That it might not be 2, but there is me and there's another, so there's more than one.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Mira. Anyone else want to have a go at Achilles' contention?
I just want to maybe go back initially when you're talking about your yellow cup, and senses, for people who don't have sight and never had sight, how do they know that it's yellow?
Well, do they know it's yellow?
Well, you said it was yellow, but what's their concept?
Okay. So what I know, okay. So I see your point. I see your point, and it's an important one. No, what I'm saying is that my knowledge of the cup is in my senses, right? It's, if you like, an impression on my retina. Now, all my knowledge of the cup. Now, my knowledge of the cup might only be touch. And for example, if it was completely dark, and although I would have some memory of other cups, but let's just take your point there. I'm not saying that that we know everything about the cup. It's that everything that I know about the cup, from which I construct the cup, is from my senses, and my senses are in me. My senses are in me. That's a difficult concept because the cup feels so solid and separate, right? But we've constructed the cup from our senses in me, in ourselves. So the touch is in you. That's how you kind of get the shape as well as the visual and everything. But it's all in you. And so the problem is to say, well, where is the cup that's not in me? I mean, is there anything, the question is there anything you know, but you're looking through this through a video, so it's kind of, there's another philosophical issue there, but is there anything that I know about this cup that is not in and from my senses? Anyone give me anything that I know about this cup that's not in and from my senses?
So you're going to wash it when you finish with it.
You don't know what it's made of.
I don't. You're telling me what I don't know. You're telling me what I know, are you? Yeah, so.
Know where you bought it from?
You know, yeah. Well, yeah. Go on. So, what is that about the knowledge of? Is that also from my senses?
From that, you'd be able to tell whether it was a good quality cup or it was a cheap cup.
Yes, but how do I get knowledge of where I bought it from? Is that from my senses? I mean, basically, I'm going to something very simple, one thing. But what the general idea is about actually all my knowledge about my sensible world, including the shop where I bought it, is in me. In me. So it's a problem. It's a problem that all philosophy hinges on. All great schools of philosophy hinge on this. You could argue this anyway. I would argue this, but you could put it another way. All great schools of philosophy, their answer to this problem kind of defines them, right? And so if you contemplate this problem and try to work it out, you might want to use Descartes' meditations or something. Then you can get to understanding where Plato is radically different from most answers to it. It is that actually all your sense experience is in yourself, right? And so if everything I know about the sensible world is in me, then how do I know that there is something independent from me? How do I know it actually exists? Because every time I try to say, oh, well, I know the color, but that's in me. Oh, I know it's hard, but I know that from touching, which is in me, and so on. So it's something to think about. And maybe you would disagree. Maybe you would disagree with that, but it would be good for you. It would be good to say, well, what that is. What I know about the cup does not come from my senses. The shop I bought it from comes from my senses. What someone told me comes from my senses.
So are we talking about experience here then?
Absolutely. Sensual experience, sensible or sensual experience, yes.
So, if, for example, I was to be born in the deepest, darkest jungles of the Amazon and know nothing about external existence, society, and all of a sudden this cup was to drop from the sky and land on my head, and I pick it up and I would look at it and think, I don't know what I would think. Is that the separation we're talking about?
It's getting there, but it's not exactly that. No, it's not that. It's
none of my senses would know about this cup.
But you would know about it when it dropped on your head. Yeah. But that knowledge is all in you.
Mm.
So there's this problem that, like, quite clearly, these objects are independent. You know, they're independent for a number of reasons. Like, I don't cause the tea to get cold. It's all in me. You seem to be able to see it. It makes sense that you can see it as well, you know. And when I turn away or leave it in the room, it's still there. So it's really just coming to a solution, but coming to see the problem.
But as Achilles said, he wouldn't know it's a cup. If it dropped on his head from the Amazon, but he would just feel it, look at it, and think, what the hell is this?
Well, he might know it as what the hell it is. He won't know it as a cup, that's true. And he wouldn't call it a cup because he doesn't speak English and so forth. I just noticed we've gone over time. I'm sorry, we're going to have to continue this. And we can continue it after I say goodbye. I finish it up. So I'm going to leave the video on. But I just want to finish up. And sorry I wasn't watching the time because I was so involved in the question. And thank you for that, Achilles. That got us really going. So I'll just say next week, we're going to read the entire dialogue. So if anyone's got any issues about finding the standard pagination, just read the entire Euthyphro. Okay, it's quite short. And it's basically where getting to the beginning of this narrative that we're following, where Socrates has been accused, he's gone to the courts to sort things out. He runs into an old mate who's a theologian, an expert on piety. So as happens in these early dialogues, Socrates says, well, we've both got an interest in piety, so let's discover what piety and impiety actually are. And you should know because you're an expert. And then they go through the discussion, trying to find out a definition of piety, and then it goes to justice. What is justice? So think about what you think, for example, justice is. Some concept like that is like the cup is a sensible thing. Now we're looking at something that is conceptual. We all seem to have an idea of what justice is. We could go to something even more simple, equality. We use equality all the time. We understand equality, but what is equality in itself? Try to define equality. Try to define justice, and read Euthyphro and see how it fits with that discussion. So there you go. And think about a few of those. If you've got a bit of a chance while you're having a cup of tea or going for your regulation walk or something, think about experience and your experience of particular things and how you know things. And, you know, it'll start you thinking philosophically. Okay, so thank you so much for coming. We'll see you same time next week.
Thank you.
And if people want to hang around, just hang around. If you missed out on a question, just hang around and I'll hang around for a bit. So bye for now.
Loved it. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, Bernie. Thank you.
I'm going to cook some dinner.
You're going to what?
Cook some dinner.
Enjoy.
Oh, can you cook me some dinner?
Thank you.
Okay. Good.
All right.
Bye, Mira.
Thanks, Betty.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye. Bye, Nick. Bye, Archie.
Okay. Did anyone want to?
All right. Thanks, Bernie. That was.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I just wanted to talk about that bloody cup and the
Yeah. Go
Amazon.
on. Well, let's keep going. Let's keep going. What were you going to say?
Oh, I forgot now.
I thought you were
Sorry.
going to make dinner.
Oh,
I'm going to cook dinner. I'll give it 5 or 10 minutes. Well, yeah, he wouldn't know what that cup is.
it fell in the jungle. But
Yeah,
the point is, I suppose, that something would fall on him and hit him, and what he knows from his senses. Does that answer the question?
yeah,
He knows from his senses.
He knows from his
know it
senses,
in the same way we know it.
Yep,
Because
got it.
we're used to it, we see it all the time. That's right.
Yep.
That's an important point. Because we do construct these ideas culturally, don't we? You know, tables and chairs are cultural constructions.
Society,
we know what they are. Computers, we know what they are if you never saw a computer.
Yeah. Okay. All righty. Thank you for that.
Well, think about that and come up with some tricky questions next week.
Okay. Bye. Good night.